Good evening, Chag Sameach, and welcome to the United Synagogue's 8 Nights of Light program, coming to you directly from the Central Synagogue, London. This is the last night of Hanukkah, of course, and in spite of the current situation, I hope that each and every one of you has enjoyed the festivities. I am Rabbi Barry Lerer. I'm the rabbi here at Central Synagogue, and I'm going to be joined soon by our wonderful Chazan Stephen Lees for tonight's candle lighting. But before we light, we're going over to Shoshana Cohen from the Women's Educator Program, Lilmod Lamed, to share a thought about Hanukkah with us.
The celebration of Hanukkah is the celebration of one small jug of oil, which was only supposed to burn for one night, and instead, miraculously, lasted for 8. However, if there was enough oil in the jug for it to last one night, and instead it burnt for 8, only 7 days of it burning were miraculous. And therefore the question is, why do we celebrate 8 nights of Hanukkah? Why is Hanukkah not a 7-day festival? So throughout history, many different answers have been suggested to this question. Rabbi Yosef Cairo, for example, writing in the 1500s, explains that the Jewish people at the time divided the oil into 8 portions, and they only lit an 1/8 of the oil each night. Yet miraculously, only an 1/8 of the oil still burned for the whole night. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev in the 1700s suggests that the last night of Hanukkah is a celebration of the military victory of the Jewish army over the Greek army. And the Meiri, Rabbi Menachem Meiri, writing in the 1200s, suggests that the extra night that we celebrate is a celebration of the fact that the Jewish army, tired, worn out by battle, and facing a destroyed and ruined temple, managed to find any jug of oil in the first place. So all of these answers seem quite different, but I think there's a thread that runs through all of them, which binds them together and teaches us an essential message about the significance of Hanukkah. So we know that God created the world in 7 days. And therefore the number 7 represents something which is natural. It represents the bounds and limits of the natural world. And therefore the number 8, the number after 7, represents the supernatural. It represents a stepping out of and rising above the limits of the natural world. And it represents transcendence. And if we think about the Hanukkah story in terms of a philosophical conflict between the Jews and the Greeks, this is a theme which runs through that as well. So as Jews, we know we're given commandments by God, and these commandments allow us to take physical, mundane, everyday objects and to use them for a holy purpose, thereby helping them transcend the limitations of the physical natural world and allowing them to connect to something holier and greater than ourselves. In contrast, Greek philosophy and Greek culture, exemplified by things such as the Olympics, focused very much on the limitations of the human mind and of the human body. And so the conflict of Hanukkah is really a conflict not just of armies, but also of these differing philosophies. And if we now go back to the 3 answers which we mentioned before, we can see how the theme of transcendence runs through them all. So for example, the answer about the oil being divided into 8ths suggests the transcendence of the natural world. A certain amount of oil is only supposed to burn for a certain amount of time. And the fact that an 8th of the oil still burned for the entire night represents a transcendence of the laws of nature. The answer about the military victory suggests the transcendence of the human body. The Jewish army was very, very small and had very inferior military equipment, especially compared to the massive superpower Greek army. And therefore their victory represents a transcendence of the human body and a transcendence of human strength and the limitations of that. And finally, the last answer we suggested about the Jewish army being able to find any oil in the first place represents a transcendence of the human mind and the human will and the human limits. The army were tired. They had just come back from fighting a war. The temple that they found was in complete ruins. When they got there, everything was destroyed and smashed and lying in a mess. And yet they still managed to find the strength within themselves to start looking in the first place, to try even when it seemed hopeless, and to transcend the limits of the human mind. And so therefore, on the last night of Hanukkah, the message that's very clear is that we have the power. You have the power to rise above the natural limitations of the world, to rise above all the things you think are pulling you down and holding you back from achieving whatever you want. And on the last night of Hanukkah, we should look at the flames and really look at what they're telling us. And what they're telling us is that you have the power, you have the ability to rise beautiful and glorious like the flames themselves.
Thank you very much, Shoshana. Now, as you all know, this past year has been the 150th anniversary of the United Synagogue. And it's also been the 150th anniversary of the Central Synagogue, the only remaining synagogue of the 5 original member synagogues of the United Synagogue. And before we light the menorah in our beautiful shul, I want to show you another candelabra which we have in our shul. A candelabra that we light not on Hanukkah, but on Yom Kippur. On Erev Yom Kippur, we light this candelabra. It's a candelabra which was designed in 1920 and has 19 branches on it, one for each of 19 brave young members of Central Synagogue who gave their lives in the First World War. And the name of each soldier is written in Hebrew and English around the base of the candelabra, and we light it every Erev Yom Kippur before Kol Nidre, and it burns in their memory throughout Yom Kippur. Now, we all know that there are 2 signs which determine whether an animal is kosher or not. It has to have split hooves, and it has to chew the cud. And if an animal possesses only one of these 2 signs, it's not a kosher animal. But what is the significance of these 2 signs specifically, and what can they teach us? Rabbi Yisrael Lerer writes that hooves represent travel, moving forward. In the Western world, a father is termed the old man. Technology renders yesterday's wonders obsolete. And with the theory of evolution, there's not much of a basis to respect the earlier generations who are simply a few steps closer to having been apes. The movement is forward, 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 with hardly looking back. And that is split hooves, but not chewing the cud. Chewing the cud, on the other hand, is a regurgitation of the past. Some nations are only able to look back on their past and the success and the glory of their history. Even their present is somewhat backward. So all they can do is regurgitate the past with a promise only of a bleak future, chewing the cud, but not having split hooves. Kosher animals, though, have both. They chew the cud and have split hooves, because the Jewish people is manifested by a deep respect and reverence for the past. Those are generations that were closer to Adam and Eve, closer to those who stood at Mount Sinai. And at the same time, we have a confident faith and hope in the future and the glory that it holds. The United Synagogue and indeed Central Synagogue are great examples of this. For 150 years, both have been jewels in the crown of Anglo Jewry. Both respect its past, its pioneers, its long-standing traditions. And this community went through so much, losing 19 of its young men in battle in the First World War. And then the shul was bombed in the Second World War, but still marched on. And at the same time, it's a community that confidently moves to the future, not scared to adapt with the times. And in the past few challenging months, as well as having daily services in shul when restrictions allowed, we moved on to Zoom, creating a virtual community with Kabbalah Shabbat services, Havdalah services, shiurim, classes, social activities, and much, much more each and every week. And we will continue, please God, to move forward. We have a brand new state-of-the-art community cultural center, which will, please God, be open in the near future. And in doing so, our community is thinking ahead, thinking of the next and future generations. And now, as Hanukkah comes to an end, it's important for us to focus on the past, on the amazing miracles of the Maccabees' victory, on the miracle of the oil. The lighting of the menorah each night reminds us of this. It reminds us of the glorious past of our people. It reminds us of the temple in Jerusalem. But at the same time, we must think of the future and the hope and glory that it holds. The Jews lit the menorah that first night in the temple with just one jug of oil, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. But they had faith in their future. And we too should have confident faith and hope in the future and the glory that it holds. We'll now light the menorah for the last night of Hanukkah. I'm going to say the brachot for the menorah, and I'm going to light the candles. And after that, our chazan Stephen Lees will sing Hanerot Halalu and Ma'us Sor for us. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa nisim l'avoseinu v'yamim hahem b'zaman hazeh.
הנרות הללו אנחנו מדליקים, הנרות הללו אנחנו מדליקים, על הניסים ועל הנפלאות ועל התשועות ועל המלחמות שעשית לאבותינו, שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם, בימים ההם, בימים ההם בזמן הזה, על ידי כהניך הקדושים, בכל 8 ימי חנוכה, הנרות הללו קודשם, הנרות הללו קודשם, ויהיה לנו רשות להשתמש בהם, אלא לראותם בלבד, כדי להודות ולהלל לשמך הגדול על ניסיך ועל ישועתך ועל נפלאותיך. מעשו ישועתי לך נאה לשבח, תיכון בית תפילתי ושם תודה נסבח, ליהי תכין מטבע מצר המנבא, אז אגמור בשיר מזמור חנוכת המזבח, אז אגמור בשיר מזמור חנוכת המזבח, רעוצה ואנשי ויגון כוחי קלה, חייב מררה בקושי בשיבוד מלכותך לה, מידו הגדולה הוציא את הסגולה, חיל פרעה וכל זרעו ידו כאבן במצולה, חיל פרעה וכל זרעו ידו כאבן במצולה. דביר קודשו הביאני וגם שם לא שקטתי, ובנוגס והגלני, כי זרים עבדתי ויין רעל מסכתי, כמעט שעבדתי, קץ בבל זרובבל וקץ 70 לא שעתי, קץ בבל זרובבל וקץ 70 לא שעתי, קרות קומות בראש ביקש הגגי בן המדעתה, וניתה לו לפח ולמוקש וגאוותו נשבעתה, ראש ימיני ניסית מאויב שמו מחיתה, רוב בניו וקנייניו על העץ תלית, רוב בניו וקנייניו על העץ תלית, יוונים נקבצו עלי, אזי בימי השמנים, ופרצו חומות מגדלי, תמו כל השמנים, מי נותר קנקנים, נס לשושנים, בני בינה ימי 8, קבו שיר וננים, בני בינה ימי 8, קבו שיר וננים.
much, Chazan Lees. Ladies and gentlemen, before we say goodbye, just to say, if you come back again, please tune in tonight at 7:30 p.m., where I'll be introducing a very special guest speaker all the way from the USA, Mr. Ari Schonbrun, who will be sharing his own personal miraculous story. Ari worked at Cantor Fitzgerald in Tower 1 of the Twin Towers, and he was on the 78th floor at the time the first plane hit Tower 1 on September the 11th, 2001. 662 Cantor employees were killed that day, and Ari was one of only 4 to survive. And he helped a colleague suffering from third-degree burns to safety, walking her down those 78 flights. He is a renowned international inspirational speaker and the author of a book, Miracle and Fate on 78. He draws from personal heartbreak that he endured during that devastation of 9/11. And he deftly weaves in his capital markets expertise after more than 3 decades of working on Wall Street. He speaks with energy, fluency, wisdom, utilizing his humorous and engaging personality to stir and inspire audiences worldwide. You do not want to miss this, 7:30 p.m. back here on the US TV channel. Until then, Chanukah Sameach. Enjoy the last night of Hanukkah. All the best from Central Synagogue, London.